Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so if you lift weights, run, cycle, basically do any kind of sport, you probably know this scenario, right? You're sore, maybe you want to get back to training quickly, and you reach for an over-the-counter pain reliever.
Yeah, happens all the time.
So today we're doing a deep dive into one of the, most common drug classes out there, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs,
Yeah.
NSAIDs, basically, and specifically what happens when you use them long-term, like chronically. What does it actually do to your muscles when you're trying to build them?
It's a huge topic, yeah. Because these drugs, things like ibuprofen, diclofenac, they're just so common in fitness and recovery culture. I mean, estimates from the early 2000s suggested something like 30 million people worldwide were taking prescription NSAIDs every single day.
30 million daily. Wow. And then you look at athletes and it just skyrockets.
Oh, absolutely.
There was data from the late 90s, early 2000s showing nearly a third of Olympic athletes said they used NSAIDs in just the 3 days before they were asked.
A third. That's huge.
It puts their usage rate at something like 6 to 10 times higher than, other people their age in the general population.
And it's definitely not just the elite athletes. Amateurs often just, self-prescribe. They think it helps with pain, speeds up recovery, maybe lets them push a bit harder in the gym.
Right, that makes sense.
But the worrying part is some studies show a pretty significant chunk of people, maybe up to like almost 14% in one report, are taking more than the recommended dose, and often without any medical advice.
Okay, so let's tackle that core idea then. The common belief seems pretty simple. Less pain means you can train harder, and that equals bigger muscles, better performance. Simple enough.
Seems logical, yeah.
But is that actually what happens when you take them day in, day out?
Chronically. That's what we're digging into. Our deep dive today is centered entirely on this really interesting study by Mallinson and colleagues from 2025. They looked at chronic NSAID use combined with some serious resistance training. And our mission, really, is to unpack this kind of surprising disconnect that came out of the research, which is, does chronic NSAID use actually make your muscles bigger? And if it does, why doesn't that bigger muscle always mean you're actually stronger or perform better? It's a bit of a paradox.
Okay, let's get into the study itself, the methodology. What makes this one stand out is, how carefully it was designed.
Right, it wasn't just a quick, 2-week thing.
No, this was 12 weeks. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, the gold standard, really. Yeah. And crucially, they studied young, healthy men who were already trained lifters.
Exactly. That's key. So we're not just seeing those easy newbie gains.
Right.
They took 17 of these trained guys, average age around 24 or 25, split them up. One group got a placebo, just a dummy pill. The other group got 75 milligrams of diclofenac every day.
And diclofenac specifically.
Yeah, they chose diclofenac partly because it's quite potent, and it has this preference for inhibiting the COX-2 enzyme. That distinction, COX-1 versus COX-2, turns out to be pretty important, we think.
We'll circle back to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And they were smart. They also gave them lansoprazole, which is a proton pump inhibitor, basically to protect their stomachs. Because, taking NSAIDs long-term can be really rough on your gut.
Good call. Okay, so the drug, the setup, what about the training? You said it was serious.
Oh, yeah. It was pretty brutal, honestly, designed to really push adaptation. 3 sessions a week. For the full 12 weeks, they focused on just one leg, the non-dominant one, actually.
Unilateral training, right?
And each session involved 5 sets of 30 maximal isokinetic concentric knee extensions.
Whoa, okay, break that down. 5 sets of 30. Maximal isokinetic.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. Basically, think leg extensions on a special machine. Maximal means they push as hard as possible on every single rep. Isokinetic means the machine controls the speed, so you can't use momentum. You have to generate force through the whole movement. And concentric is just the lifting part of the extension.
So maximum effort, controlled speed for 30 reps a set, 5 times. That sounds exhausting.
It is. It adds up to 5,400 maximal contractions over those 12 weeks. A huge amount of work focused on that one leg.
Okay. And they measured muscle size, strength.
Both. They used high-res 3T MRI scans to measure muscle cross-sectional area CSA and also the total muscle volume. Really precise stuff. And they measured strength, too. They did all these measurements at the start, then again at 28 days, so about 4 weeks in, and then at the end, 84 days.
That 3-point timeline, That's where things get interesting, right?
That's exactly where the story unfolds. But first, let's just quickly bust that first myth. The idea that NSAIDs just let you train harder or tolerate more volume.
Right, the less pain equals more work idea.
Yeah. The researchers actually looked at the total work output, how much force was generated over all those thousands of contractions. And they found zero difference, absolutely none between the diclofenac group and the placebo group.
Okay, so right off the bat, the idea that these drugs simply let you push harder in the gym?
Yeah, it didn't hold up here.
No, the drugs didn't magically increase their capacity to do the work. So if they weren't training harder, how did their muscles react? Let's get to the size gains, the hypertrophy data, because this is where it gets weird.
Totally counterintuitive. Okay, so at that first check-in, 28 days in, both groups were growing, as you expect from that kind of training load.
Makes sense.
The muscle CSA increases were actually pretty similar. Placebo group was up about 4.3%, NSAID group up 4.6%, basically neck and neck early on.
Okay, normal adaptation starting.
But then things changed. Between day 28 and day 84, their paths really diverged. The placebo group, they kind of hit a wall.
Plateaued.
Pretty much. By the end, at day 84, their total muscle CSA increase from the very beginning was only 3.9%. So basically, all their growth happened in that first month, and then it just stopped. Or maybe even slightly dipped back down.
Okay, what about the diclofenac group?
They just kept going. That upward trend continued strong. At the end of the 12 weeks, their total increase in muscle CSA was a massive 8.6% from baseline.
Wait, 8.6 versus 3.9?
Exactly. Significantly greater. More than double the size gain compared to the guys who just did the hard work without the drug. And this wasn't like a small difference. It was statistically significant. P equals 0.038 for those keeping score.
Wow, so more than double the growth?
Yeah.
Just from taking the diclofenac daily alongside the training.
And the muscle volume measurements showed the same thing. NSAID group gained 8.3% volume, placebo only 3.8% by the end. So yeah, chronic diclofenac seems to really accelerate and sustain muscle size gains, even in guys who are already trained when they're doing this kind of high volume work.
That's pretty incredible. But, okay, this leads us right into the big puzzle, doesn't it? The strength paradox.
The big but.
If the NSAID group built muscles that were, significantly bigger, why weren't they significantly stronger?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because they did get stronger. Both groups saw really substantial strength gains. Their isometric knee extensor strength went up by like 40 to 50% on average from baseline. Huge improvements for trained guys.
Okay, so both groups got much stronger.
Yes. But the extra muscle size the diclofenac group packed on, it didn't translate into extra strength gains compared to the placebo group. There was just no difference in the final strength numbers between the two groups.
Okay, help me square this. Muscle gets bigger. That's hypertrophy, right? Growth of the muscle fibers. Usually that's what leads to more strength. Are we saying the NSAID group built, I don't know, fluffier muscle that looks bigger but doesn't actually produce more force?
That's kind of the implication, or at least the question the data raises. And it's not totally unheard of, this disconnect between size and strength. We sometimes see similar things with other compounds, like certain SARMs, selective androgen receptor modulators, or things that inhibit myostatin.
Right.
You get bigger muscle fibers visually, but maybe the quality isn't there. Perhaps the density of the contractile proteins, or maybe the nerve connection activating the muscle. Something isn't keeping pace with the size increase.
So if the size gain wasn't because they trained harder and the exercise didn't make them stronger, the real action must be happening deeper down, right? At the molecular level. We need to look under the hood.
Precisely. We need to see how this specific kind of hypertrophy happened. And the researchers did exactly that. They looked at gene expression. They quantified 93 specific mRNA transcripts.
Okay, so the messages from the genes that tell the cells what proteins to actually build.
Exactly. Stuff related to regulating muscle mass. And what they found was that the gene networks linked to building muscle and metabolism were altered about twice as much in the NSAID group compared to placebo.
Twofold more altered.
Yeah, at both the 28-day mark and the 84-day mark. It lined up perfectly with that extra muscle growth they saw.
So the genetic signaling was just way more active in the diclofenac group. What did the pathway analysis show? IPA, was it?
Yeah, ingenuity pathway analysis. It uses the gene expression data to predict what biological processes are being turned up or down. And it painted a really clear picture of how different the groups were by the end.
Okay, what did it predict for the placebo group at 84 days? After 3 months of hard training.
For the placebo group, the prediction was actually inhibition of muscle formation. Their bodies had adapted, they had been through the grinder, and the signals are basically saying, okay, ease off the construction.
Makes sense. Adaptation slowing down.
But the diclofenac group, totally different story.
Let me guess. Activation.
High confidence activation of muscle formation at both 28 days and 84 days. It's like, the NSAID group's muscles were still getting the message, keep building, keep adapting. Even after 12 weeks, the drugs seem to override that normal signal that tells muscle growth to level off in trained individuals.
That's fascinating. It's like it kept them in a perpetual beginner gain state, molecularly speaking.
Kind of, yeah. It disrupted that normal feedback loop. And this activation wasn't just general, it was tied to specific important players in muscle building.
Like which ones?
We saw activation linked to key myogenic transcription factors, things like PALX7, MYF5, MYF6, PAX3. You can think of these as like the foremen on the construction site, located in muscle stem cells, the satellite cells. They tell these cells, okay, wake up, divide, merge with the existing muscle fibers, make things bigger.
Gotcha. The master switches for growth.
Pretty much. And they also saw higher expression of things like IGF-1, a well-known growth factor, and PTCS2, which is actually the gene for KOX2 itself, interestingly enough. It all pointed towards the strong, sustained genetic drive for building more muscle tissue in the NSAID group.
And having that molecular data is crucial, right? Because it pushes back against the idea that maybe the size increase was just, water weight or swelling.
Absolutely. NSAIDs can cause water retention. That's a known side effect. But the gene expression data strongly suggests this was real structural hypertrophy being driven at the genetic level, not just puffiness.
Okay. Now, you mentioned inflammation earlier. NSAIDs are anti-inflammatories. Was that playing a role? Did they block inflammation that might normally hinder growth?
That's what a lot of previous thinking suggested, that maybe NSAIDs blunt muscle growth because some inflammation is actually necessary for the repair and rebuilding process.
Right.
But this study looked at key inflammatory markers in the muscle tissue itself, proteins like IL-6 and TNF-alpha, and they found no difference between the diclofenac group and the placebo group at any time point.
No difference. Huh. So the diclofenac wasn't making the muscles less inflamed, at least not based on those markers.
Correct. Which suggests that maybe the typical low-grade inflammation you get from exercise wasn't the main thing limiting growth in the placebo group here, or that the diclofenac wasn't working primarily by suppressing that kind of inflammation. Its effect seems more directly tied to those growth signaling pathways.
Okay, so this might bring us back to the specific drug they used, diclofenac, and its KOX2 preference.
Exactly. It might be really important. Remember, NSAIDs work by blocking cyclooxygenase enzymes, KOX1 and KOX2.
Can you just quickly remind us what KOX1 and KOX2 generally do?
Sure. KOX1 is kind of the housekeeping enzyme. It's involved in things like protecting your stomach lining, kidney function, blood clotting, basic stuff. KOX2, on the other hand, tends to get ramped up specifically at sites of injury or inflammation. It's more involved in the pain and swelling response.
And diclofenac hits KOX2 harder.
Yeah, it has a strong preference for inhibiting KOX2 over KOX1, and that could be key.
Why? How does that compare to other NSAIDs?
Well, if you look back at some older studies, particularly ones using really high doses of ibuprofen, like 1,200 milligrams a day, which is a lot.
Yeah, that's high.
Ibuprofen tends to be a bit more balanced or even lean towards inhibiting KOX1 more strongly, especially at those doses. And some of those studies actually showed that high-dose ibuprofen either suppressed muscle gains or had no effect.
Oh, okay. So maybe the pro-hypertrophy effect seen here with diclofenac is specifically linked to hitting KOX2 chronically.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's something else unique to diclofenac.
It strongly suggests that, yeah, it might not be a general NSAID effect, but something more specific to drugs with this KOX2 selectivity profile, or maybe even an off-target effect of diclofenac we don't fully understand yet. Dose and duration likely matter a lot, too.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together then. We've got this intense chronic training program. Adding daily diclofenac leads to significantly bigger muscles, double the growth after that first month compared to placebo. That seems driven by keeping those muscle-building genes switched on.
Yep.
BOT, absolutely no extra benefit in terms of functional strength, or the ability to actually perform more work during training.
That's the core finding. It really makes you question what we mean by a good adaptation, doesn't it? The takeaway really hinges on what your goal is.
Right, so if your number one goal is just aesthetics, purely muscle size, hypertrophy, getting bigger.
Then, this data suggests that chronic use of a TOX2-leaning NSAID, like diclofenac, could potentially boost those size gains, especially if you're already trained and maybe feeling like you've hit a plateau.
And it's a big but.
A very big but. If your goal is actual performance, getting stronger, being more powerful for your sport, then this exercise doesn't seem to help. The study authors themselves, called chronic NSAID, use alongside training incautious if maximizing functional strength is what you're after. You get bigger, but not proportionally stronger or better performing.
So that's the hypertrophy paradox, clear as day. More muscle mass with chronic diclofenac, yes, but no competitive edge in strength or work capacity.
It's a fascinating outcome because it really highlights that muscle size and muscle function aren't always perfectly linked, especially when you introduce drugs into the equation. They can be uncoupled.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the final thought, the provocative question this leaves us with. The study warns against using these drugs just to get stronger in the gym, but
the fact that diclofenac was so effective at reactivating those muscle-building pathways, even in trained guys who should have plateaued, well, that raises a really interesting clinical possibility, doesn't it?
You mean not for athletes, but for medicine?
Exactly. Could NSAIDs, maybe specific ones like diclofenac, be used strategically, not for performance, but for recovery? Think about situations where muscle loss, muscle wasting is a huge problem, like after a major injury, surgery, or during certain illnesses.
Where rebuilding lost muscle is the primary goal.
Precisely. Could these drugs potentially help kickstart that rebuilding process more effectively in a therapeutic setting, using them specifically to restore lost muscle mass? That seems like a really important avenue for future research, building directly off these surprising findings.